Hey guys, thanks for watching. Today I want to do something a little different. I need to go back and revisit something from a couple videos ago because it's really been just stewing around in my mind, and I am history hound, and you know that I'm constantly looking for a connection to history and a story that comes from something that I found. Sometimes those stories take a little bit to come together. And that's what happened in this situation. So a couple videos back, if you want to see what I'm talking about, you can go watch 2 videos back. And I'm artifact hunting. And in this neat little site that I've run across in this little plowed field, finding signs of, some old campfires and lots of artifacts. So in the one day that I hunted there, I picked up, I believe it was 10 total artifacts. 8 of those artifacts were made out of quartz. Now, in Western North Carolina, the vast majority of our Native American artifacts are quartz, especially the projectile points. That's the natural material that the natives had in this area. That's what they used for the most part. But every now and again, we run across different materials. Now, one of those 10 artifacts was just a broken flake, I believe, but it was what a lot of people refer to as flint. It's actually called Knox chert, and I've mentioned it several times in other videos that it came from eastern Tennessee, just over the mountains from us. But there was also another artifact, and it was a really neat point, and it was made out of material that I had never found before. After you guys watched the video, a lot of you commented correctly identifying that artifact as being made of a material called rhyolite. And a lot of you people that correctly identified it, you live east of me. You either live in the Piedmont of North Carolina or in South Carolina. And the reason, more than likely, why you knew it was rhyolite is because you artifact hunt yourself and you have found pieces made out of that. So that was my good indication as to where this rhyolite was coming from. But I wanted to know an exact source. So I started researching, and here's what I found. The chances are that this rhyolite artifact came from the URE Mountains in central North Carolina, south central North Carolina. If you go to the URE Mountains today, and mountains might be a little bit of a stretch, good-sized hills, small mountains at the most. What you will find on the top of a lot of these little mountains in that range is that the ground is littered with rhyolite, broken up rhyolite. And what you're actually looking at are the tailing piles, the remains of where the Native Americans were quarrying this material. It literally covers the ground in places. And so that's how this piece, we know it traveled. How far away is the URE Mountains from where I found this piece? About 3.5 hours if you're driving. Boy, if you're on foot, it's a lot longer journey. And so that's where this story begins, because I wondered, why did this piece make this journey? Now, we can't know everything perfectly. And you have to be careful, because it's possible that some Native American years and years ago took a trip to Western North Carolina from the Piedmont area, and he dropped an artifact. However, I went back to this field, and I'm going to show you a clip now of the single artifact that I found on my second return to this field to artifact hunt. All right, got an artifact here. And if you remember the last video, that really nice complete point that I found was made out of material I'd never found before. There's some more of it right there. I have a feeling that's the base. I could be wrong on that. That could be the point end, but I don't know. Something about it makes me think that was a big old long point. It'd been nice to have. So now there's 2 pieces of this rhyolite that have shown up in this field out of 10 or 11 artifacts total. That's important. That tells me I didn't just get lucky and happen to find the single rhyolite artifact out there. There's more. If we could sift the entire field, I'm going to find more rhyolite. And that speaks to Native American trade. Why is that important? You may think that's completely boring. To me, there's a story there. See, when I pick up an artifact like that, I wonder about how it got here. I wonder about how far it traveled and the people that made it travel. So I'm going to tell you a couple stories because I think we need to re-examine the way that we think about Native Americans, because we have got some really, really bad history. And whether we admit it or not, it's kind of embedded and ingrained in a lot of our thinking. Let's do a little test here. I'm going to say something, and I want you to think about what I say. And I want you to think about what's the first thing that pops into your head when I say it. What type of person would say what I'm about to say? You ready? I come bearing gifts. Now, the chances are you thought of a Native American when I said that. Why did you think of a Native American? Because you have heard that line repeated in movies. See, in a lot of the movies that we see from the 30s, 40s, 50s, even today, Native Americans are portrayed one of two ways. Savages, war paint, war drums, people to be feared, people that inspire terror. That's the bad Native Americans. And then there's another portrayal, and that's the good Native Americans. And repeatedly, we see them come bearing gifts. We have this idea in mind of the Native Americans as this gift-giving society. And so did the first Europeans that ever arrived. Now, we just celebrated Thanksgiving. How many times have you heard the story of how, Squanto and the Native Americans showed up and, they saved the pilgrims' bacon by bringing gifts to help them, gifts of food to help them survive the harsh winter? Well, there's an element of truth to that story. But there's also something that we're missing there. Because if we just stop short and say, it was simply just some empathetic, kind Native Americans showing up to give gifts, we're only getting half the story. Now, we can't discount the fact that there were empathetic Native Americans that did do just that. They were kind, good people. We can't discount that. But in a lot of the instances where we see Native Americans making first contact with Europeans and they have gifts in their hands, and we see this portrayed in a lot of paintings, there was an ulterior motive. The Native Americans understood that the Europeans, when they showed up, they brought with them resources that the Native Americans did not have access to. Iron tools, knives, axes, pots, glass beads. So let me tell you the first story. You may have heard of this one. It's the story of how Manhattan Island was acquired from the Native Americans. And it goes something, loosely like there were some Dutchmen, I believe, that encountered some Native Americans and they inquired about the island and could we purchase the island. And so a deal was made, and the numbers that are out there are something I've heard like $24 in glass beads. The truth behind that is there was a trade, and we don't have a lot of details about what exactly all exchanged hands. But, the value was more than $24. But, some glass beads, let's just look at that. To a European, glass beads are worthless. They have all that they want. Not interested in any more. And so when we tell this story, the underlying message is, boy, we pulled one over on the Native Americans. And even darker than that is maybe that the Native Americans were simplistic, childlike, stupid in their understanding. But I want to rethink that. Let's just say it was a box of glass beads. To the Europeans, worthless. But if a Native American gets his hands on a box of glass beads and he travels south and west, and he encounters tribes who have never seen glass beads or who don't have a ready supply or good access to them, what he has in his hand is a hot commodity. He has something very valuable, something he can trade and do quite well for himself with. And still there's that mental hurdle we have of, but they're just glass beads. There's no real intrinsic value there. But there is ascribed value. And ascribed value is something that we know and understand fully even today. Look down at your feet. If you're wearing shoes, what type of shoes are you wearing? Now, you know that you can go down to Walmart or the dollar store and buy a pair of shoes for probably less than 20 bucks. But the chances are, unless you're my dad, who's a very sensible guy and is probably wearing a $20 pair of shoes right now, your shoes cost a lot more than $20. Why did you pay more for your shoes when a pair of $20 shoes would have worked? You paid more for them because of a name brand and because of ascribed value. Some of you might be wearing shoes that cost between $100 and $200, 5 times the amount that you actually needed to pay. But you happily paid that amount because people have placed value on a name brand. No real intrinsic value, but ascribed value. So we do the same thing still today, and we do it willingly and happily. So the idea behind the Native Americans being just a gift-giving culture with no real thought to value or trade, that's a complete myth. Now here's the second story. This story illustrates just how far the Native Americans went, just how extensive their trade networks were, and their awareness of resources that were contained all over the eastern United States. And this really surprised me because I think a lot of times we think of the Native American if you're artifact hunting and you find an artifact, you kind of have an idea of maybe what Native American people group owned that artifact or made that artifact, but we hold them isolated in one little area in our minds. And we think, well, this was the area this tribe lived in, and up here was the area this tribe lived in. And we don't think so much about the interaction between the two and just how far they went to interact in trade. So the second story begins all the way back in 1673 with a man by the name of Captain Abraham Woods. He was a trader with the Native Americans. He lived in Virginia. He wanted to see if it was possible to punch through the Appalachian Mountains and make contact with the tribes that lived on the other side. Nobody had really done that before, and he felt like there was an opportunity there. So he hired a couple guys, one named James Needham and one named Gabriel Arthur. And he wants them to drop down out of Virginia and to travel through the Carolinas and to push through the Appalachian Mountains and make contact. That's exactly what they do. Now, the route that they took is up for a little bit of debate. Some people say they pushed through the western Carolina mountains and ended up in eastern Tennessee in what would be called the Overhill tribes of the Cherokee. And some say they pushed right through the area that I'm sitting right now, probably within a mile of where I'm sitting. And they went to the Valley Town tribes of the Cherokee and ended up right there in North Georgia somewhere. Doesn't matter. I lean towards the Tennessee side of the story. Regardless, they made it through the mountains and made contact. Now, at this point, James Needham decides he needs to go on a return trip and deliver a letter to Abraham Woods, letting them know that they've made it and they've made contact. So that's what he does. And he takes an Indian guide with him. So he delivers his letter, and then he starts on his way back to the Indian village, probably in North Georgia, where Gabriel Arthur is awaiting him. But something happens on this return trip. And it's never humorous when somebody dies, but you got to admit the story is a little bit on the humorous side of things. On the way back to the village, somebody, either Needham or his guide, they dump a pack into a creek, a pack of supplies, and it gets soaking wet. And this starts an argument. And these guys start griping at each other all day long. It just goes on and on and on until Needham reaches the point that he has had enough. And so he grabs a hatchet and he says, you know what? If you want to fight, let's fight. Now, I don't think this was a direct quote, but I imagine the Native American said something along the lines of, I'll be your huckleberry. And he grabs a musket and he shoots Needham dead. Never bring a hatchet to a musket fight. So Needham doesn't make it. That leaves Gabriel Arthur, this 19-year-old young man, alone with this tribe of Cherokee, probably in North Georgia. At this time, the Cherokee decide they're going on a journey, and they're taking Gabriel Arthur with them. Now, I want you to listen how far they traveled. They left North Georgia and they went south, and they made it all the way down to North Florida, South Alabama, somewhere on the Gulf Coast, and along the way, they're raiding other tribes because they are fully aware that these tribes exist and that they have resources that are desirable. So once they hit the Gulf Coast, then they travel west until they hit the Mississippi River. And then they head north. They go all the way up the Mississippi River until they finally get to Ohio, raiding along the way. And then they turn south and they return back to their village. Now this journey, 1,300, 1,500 miles on foot, and they did it in 11 months. That speaks to the Native American knowledge of what was out there. This was a raiding party, but it just as easily could have been a trading party. The point is they were not isolated. They understood that there were resources out there, and they understood the importance of trade. And why is that important to know? Because so many of our stories have stripped the Native American culture of this level of sophistication and understanding. So many of our stories really reduce them in their intelligence. And it started with the first European contact. They just did not understand who the Native Americans were as a group of people. And a lot of those legends persist even till today. So, I found an artifact in a field. No, it didn't travel 1,500 miles. Traveled a couple hundred, though. And that's important because it's just a little piece of a big story that helps us understand better those people that came before us.